Ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Grace, and I'll be your moderator for today's event, Sticky Wicket, How to Make Difficult Decisions. And the goal of today is to teach you how to use design thinking to make tough life and work decisions. And I'm joined by Ashley Ritter. And Ashley brings nearly 15 years of experience across a variety of sectors and disciplines, including career coaching, nonprofit management, healthcare, and higher education. She holds a deep personal commitment to racial, economic, and gender justice and considers this a core value in her life. She's a certified Master of Career Services and also a certified Designing Your Life coach, which is a program created by leading experts in the field of design thinking. In her spare time, Ashley considers herself an Olympic-level ice cream eater, a power walker, and a lover of all things fun. She lives in Chicago with her spouse and 2 kids. So please, during this session, chat in your questions for Ashley. We'll have a Q&A towards the end. And I've had conversations with Ashley in the past just about life things and career things, and trust me, you'll want her advice, so chat in those questions for her. So now Ashley will walk you through all of the ins and outs of making decisions, big and small. Ashley, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Grace, and welcome everyone. Kudos to you for signing in to another time where you're in front of a screen. I know that requires so much energy from us these days, and I can guarantee that this time hopefully will feel interactive. It will feel like something that you can actually work out some challenges in real time here. And I like to keep the energy high, as Grace says. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off. I have a few slides that we can look at to give us some visuals. And then Grace, at any point that you want to interrupt me, feel free if anything's coming up that we need to address. And then like Grace said, please feel free to type in the chat so I can see that you're there. So I can actually see your faces. So it'll be nice to see where you're from, what brought you to the time today. So Grace, if you want to go ahead and share the slides whenever you're ready.
My little screen share button has disappeared, so
that is okay. Take your time.
Okay, let me refresh and we'll see what happens.
Well, let's see some greetings from folks. I see that we've got Katja here from Honolulu. Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We have snow outside here, so it might be a little different in Chicago. Anyone else want to share where they're from today? Okay, we've got someone from Champaign. All right. Sometimes I'm indecisive. I love it. Yes, sometimes a lot of creative thinkers are, because we actually have lots of good ideas. So this is the right workshop for you if you feel undecisive sometimes. And then someone else, Chris from Honolulu, welcome. Thanks for being here. Anyone else want to share where they are tuning in from today? Or what brought you to this workshop? Okay. Well, so let me go ahead while we're working on getting the slides up. I'm going to share just a little bit about myself. Oh, Grace, are you wanting to share something?
Yeah, Ashley, if you don't mind, if you can pull this up, and can you see the share screen button?
I can, yes. You know what? Part of being able to be in a startup space is the quick pivot. Am I right? So we're going to quick pivot here, and I have my slides ready, so I'm more than happy.
Okay, I am so sorry about that.
You're okay. All right. So first off, while I'm pulling this up, I want you to, in the chat, if you know what a sticky wicket is, tell me what that term means to you while I pull up the slides. Okay. And a special kudos to anyone who knows the technical origin of the term.
There's literally no liquid left in my body.
Hey Grace, do you want me to try?
Welcome to I don't know where my button went. It just says Miro and YouTube.
That happened to me the other day, which was really strange.
news, everyone. I have the slides here, so they should be up in just a moment if we can't get it from our other organizer here with us.
Yes, Katya is working on it.
Okay.
It looks like sticky wicket is an unknown phrase. So Ashley, I'm excited to hear you explain it.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I'm going to let you all get the slides then, and I'll just share what a sticky wicket is. How about that? So, in case you weren't sure what this term actually is, this is actually I wondered when I was choosing the name how it would strike people, if you would be sure what it was or what it is. And so a sticky wicket technically actually is a term from what I understand from cricket. Now I can tell you I've never played cricket a day in my life, but it's essentially a situation that's really challenging to figure out. It's a situation that doesn't have quite a clear answer. And so today, what I'm hopeful we can do is to dive in and really make this time, like I said, interactive for you so that we can talk about how to approach challenging decisions. And so again, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for your patience as we worked through our technical challenge. If we want to go ahead to the next slide, we'll get started. So, like I said, we want to talk about different kinds of problems. We're going to just lightly touch on design thinking. For those of you who are in this space, you know that design thinking is actually a very broad and deep term and is something that people spend years of their career working in. So we're going to do just a nice little shallow touch on it so that you can take that information and launch it into your own life and career in whatever way makes sense for you. We're going to talk about diverging and converging ideas, and then finally we'll discuss just a little bit of the locus of control, and we'll talk about whether or not that's a term that's familiar to you. So again, my hope is that you get some new frameworks, some new ideas about how to approach problems. Let's go ahead and dive into the next slide. Okay, so again, you are ready to take on the world, and we're talking about solving problems today. And many of you, I know, it would be great in the chat if you want to share if you are someone who is further along in your career, or if you're someone who is in college and still kind of determining what your path is going to be, or whether you're in high school and you are still deciding what's next. So if you want to go ahead and chat a little bit of that in, if you feel comfortable doing that. But I want you to go ahead and think about all the kind of hopes and dreams you had, whether you're just starting in your life and career or you're further in your career. And think for a moment of how great it felt just to dream and hope, right, for good things in your life. Now let's go to the next slide. This thing called reality, though, quickly can set in for us, right? It's not uncommon that we might have a hope or a goal, but then we encounter some sort of challenge. So if you could go ahead and type into the chat right now, a challenge that people face in life that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's just maybe a decision. Something that doesn't have a straightforward answer. So I'm going to wait and see what answers we get here. Challenges. Where to live. Yes, absolutely. Another decision you may have to face. Yes, pursuing a full-time or going startup. I have been here myself. I definitely understand that feeling. Do you invest more time and resources in your full-time efforts, or do you go for the startup challenge, right? Any other challenges that you think people face as they are thinking about life and career? What courses to take? Absolutely. What major to choose? We can go ahead to the next slide. So these are just a few of the examples that I've encountered. And like Grace said, I've been in the career and leadership coaching space for close to 15 years. And so I always tell people that I've heard and seen it all. Nothing's going to scare me. That in reality, whether you are a senior in high school whether you are looking to find a promotion or whether you're at a C-suite level in your organization, there are some sort of challenges or decisions you may face. Where to go to school, what to major in, who to choose as a life partner. Do you even want a life partner? How to find a job after college? Where will you live? What kind of community do you want to be a part of? And deciding, I saw someone else chatted in full-time or going startup, especially when you have choices around family and choices around your financial implications around that too. So really, all of us this is not new information, right? We're used to the fact that we face problems every day throughout our day, all the way down to something as simple as what am I going to wear, right? We can go on to the next slide. So really what I'm getting at here and what I kind of want to frame out for us during our time is there really are two types of problems, or at least for our purposes today. We're focused on thinking of two different types. There's static problems and there's dynamic problems. Okay, so static problems are things like 1 + 1 = 2. Static problems are things that have a very clear, straightforward answer. I'm getting a low grade in a class, and so therefore I need to study more and get a better grade, right? If I am thinking that I don't want to get a parking ticket, I need to not park in the spot that shows that you might get a parking ticket that's out of the lines or whatever. So again, static problems they have straightforward answers. Dynamic problems, though, there isn't quite one answer. So again, part of what we're talking about here and what I think is really interesting, if you think about our education, for many of us, we spend our early years throughout our primary school, our middle, our senior level school, and we're solving static problems. And what's ironic is that we actually spend a lot of time in our lives solving for problems that don't have one right, clear answer. And so one of the things I see is that many times folks will be approaching problems in their life and career with this same sort of framework, this same idea that sort of assumes that there's one answer that we're supposed to somehow find and drive toward. And what actually happens is when we apply that framework, it can create a lot of tension and anxiety because we're looking for an answer that doesn't exactly exist. So part of what I want us to do today is I would like to offer us a new framework when it comes to thinking about the problems and the challenges in our life. So let's go ahead to the next slide. And as I promised you, I want this to be interactive. So here's what I want to do. Oh, well, actually, I want to more than interactive. I want to give you visuals. So you can see direct answer, many possible answers, right? Now, before we go to the next slide, I want to mention, again, direct answers, 1 + 1 = 2. I want you to think for a moment of some of the things that have many possible answers. We've hit on a few of them: what to major in, what direction to go next in your career. But there's also things like, I want you to kind of just think about some other option. Yeah, someone mentioned purpose. Absolutely. What's my purpose? That is something that I actually work with a great deal. Any of you all can, after this, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, because that's actually what drove me into doing this kind of work, is that at the end of the day, many of us come home and say, what am I really motivated by? What am I driving toward? And the reality is there's not just one answer for that for many of us in our life. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So hopefully you're getting an idea of the difference between static problems and dynamic problems. Hopefully you're getting an idea that much of our training has taught us to seek out the exact right answer, but in fact, much of life is doesn't quite have those lines in it. And so, as I mentioned, I want this to be interactive for you. So I would like for you to grab a notebook or an iPad or a tablet or whatever you use to write down notes. And I want you to think of an area in your own life where you are stuck, a problem you're facing, something that's dynamic, something that doesn't have a straightforward answer, okay? And you don't need to put it in the chat. this is actually for you. And so this again, the term workshop used to mean you actually workshop some ideas for yourself, right? And so that's actually what I want to have happen for you today. When you leave, you should have a piece of paper or a notebook where you've kind of jotted out a bunch of ideas and thoughts as we're going. And I'm going to give you prompts. And so one of these prompts is right here where it says number 1. And I want you to go ahead and write out a challenge or a problem that you know that you're facing that doesn't have an exact answer. I'm going to give us a minute or two actually of just some quiet. So there'll be quiet pauses throughout this presentation for you to actually kind of reflect, okay, and synthesize what we're talking about. Kind of takes some time. So I'm looking at my clock now. I'm going to give you a minute or so. Go ahead and write something out. I encourage you also, sure what to choose. Go with the thing that comes to your mind first. And also really flesh out an idea here. So rather than just writing down one word, if you were to describe it in a full sentence, go ahead and jot out what exactly is the challenge and why does it feel like a challenge for you? Take about 10 or 15 more seconds. Okay, so hopefully you have kind of thought of something here that works for you when you're thinking about a dynamic challenge. If anyone wants to share along the way, you're welcome to in the chat, but I recognize this is quite personal. So if you want to just keep it to yourself, that's also okay. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'm going to share more about how to take this challenge into a new framework. Okay, so now that you've written down the challenge that you're facing, and again, many examples we could use here. I'll try and share examples along the way. What I want you to do now is to look out for something called limited beliefs or limited thinking. So here's what limited thinking is. You see in the picture, right? We've got concrete. Do flowers grow in concrete? No. No, my 5-year-old would tell you, no, flowers grow in dirt. They need sun, they need water, they need rain. It's very clear what flowers need, okay? That's exactly what my little sweet, very thoughtful 5-year-old would say. But here it is. There's a flower growing in concrete. This is something we do a lot in our challenges is we have a lot of assumptions when we write down. So an example would be, well, I can't go for that job because you need a PhD to do that. I can't go for that position because it says in the job description you need 3 to 5 years of experience. I can't move to Toledo because I don't know anyone there. So I want you to look back at your problem statement or your challenge that you wrote out. And I want you to think to yourself, where are there limited beliefs? Where are you assuming something is true that may not be? Take a few moments here. And as you're going through this, I'm going to give us a sample person. Okay, so we're going to say Tony. It was on the first slide, and he wrote down, gosh, I feel really, really stuck in my current job. It's my first job I got after college, and I don't really know what's next for me. So my challenge is not fulfilled by my career. And let's say that he decided that he really cared about environmental science, and so he works in a lab. But once he got to the lab, he found he was doing the same tests over and over again every day, and he doesn't feel very fulfilled by that. So now for section number 2, Tony might say, well, I can't do anything else because my degree is in laboratory science, and this is all that I really am qualified to do. Right there would be the limiting belief, because Tony actually could probably do a lot of things. He's just not sure what they are yet. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment. Does anyone else identify with that? And let me ask in the chat, does anyone feel like, is it hard to identify what some of your limiting beliefs are? Or is this a new term for anyone? Just chat at me real quick. Is this a familiar term or new? Familiar, new, familiar, got it, yep, good. Great. We're probably going to have a combination of familiar and new. That makes sense. And part of why I bring this up is whether it's familiar or new to you, the real challenge is the application. So I do this for a living. I am a coach and I help people identify where their limited beliefs might be about themselves or about the situation. And every single day I do this same thing to myself. I assume certain things aren't possible without exploring whether they are or not. So the application, the mindset is what's really key. Let's move to the next slide and keep things moving. So now let's connect this to design thinking. So some of you, I'm sure many of you in the audience are familiar with design thinking. For those of you who are not, let me just offer this definition. And let me also be clear that design thinking is definitely not something I personally came up with, but it's something that a lot of people are involved in every day. Tim Brown is a leading expert in this area. He works with IDEO, and this is his quote. Design thinking is a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success. So if you're unfamiliar with design thinking, part of what happens here is that this is a new way to approach problems. It actually is something that has, like I said, 20, 30 years of background and research behind it. And oftentimes it's employed by engineers. So now we're actually in a phase where a lot of folks are saying, where can we apply design thinking to solve other problems besides just design or engineering problems, right? So problems in life, problems around equity, problems around systems, okay? Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And again, this is going to be we could do a entire set of several courses on this topic. So we're hitting very shallow here, but this is an image. And again, this is pulled from the IDEO toolkit, and many of these resources are referenced at the end of the presentation. You can click the links. There's lots of ways you can find these resources online, and I want to give credit to the folks who created these images. But this right here is a way to actually envision what design thinking is. So we heard in the previous definition, it's the way to take people's challenges, to consider what the possibilities are, and to think about how that applies to, we'll say, business success or whatever success that end user needs. So who's the end user in this concept? You, because you're the one who is facing a challenge, right? Everyone has, I imagine, some access to some sort of phone or tablet or something. That's how you're here today. So I want you to think about your phone, right? How did they create this phone? Did someone, I'm sure one day in there was like, wow, this is, I envision a totally new reality of what could be possible, right? They empathized with the end user of people using phones. Now, I'm going to date myself here for a moment. Does anyone remember being on their little flip phone and going, A, B, like trying to text with I need to know in the chat, who remembers that? Does anyone remember that, please? Don't leave me out here by myself. I used to, and I remember thinking, this is the dumbest thing. Why are we doing this? And then finally one day, what happened? Someone put a whole new framework on how to send a chat. Uh, what they were doing is they were empathizing with the end user of their product. They defined clearly what the challenge and the problem was. They ideated, or they created many ideas of what could be possible. Then they prototyped how they would take those ideas and what they needed to play with, what would actually work, how big did the keyboard need to be on the phone, what were people's thumbs like, right? And then they had to test, do people actually like the design of this phone? Does this really work? So part of what you have in design thinking is this same framework, but applied to problems in your own life. And so often, and what I have seen in people's stories is that we forget to go through this process. And so often what we do is we skip this process and we go pretty much to the end. I need to figure out what to do and I need to do it. We're very action-oriented society, action-oriented culture. And so we skip so many steps that we need to do, particularly the one around empathy, and particularly empathy for ourselves. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. I'm going to give us a chance to reflect a little bit here. So hopefully everyone feels fairly clear on the basic concept of design thinking. It's a new frame to solve challenges. It's traditionally used in engineering or design spaces. And what we're doing now is thinking about creative ways to apply that to our own lives. So I want you to take a moment. This is number 3, reflection number 3. I want you to think about that empathy. Was it hexagons? The empathy square, the empathy one, the empathy step. And I want you to think about the problem you wrote down on your piece of paper, or the challenge, or the thing that you're a little stuck on. And I want you to ask yourself, where have I not empathized with myself on this problem? Where have I kind of dismissed something I kind of know to be true about this, or that I want to pay attention to, but there's some other voice that tells me that's not possible, or I shouldn't try? I'm going to give you a moment to write that down. I intentionally build in just a little bit of silence into all of my presentations. Part of why I do that is because I think it's a critical part of what we need in our careers and lives and decision making. And I think doing it in the context of a presentation can sometimes demonstrate how rare that is in our lives, or how uncomfortable it can feel. Now, I'm sure many of us may have a mindfulness or meditation practice where we are quiet during the day. But even still, this is something I've worked with enough people to know that this is where people tend to feel a bit of resistance, or a bit of like, oh, I don't want to actually think about how I feel with this problem. I don't want to think about this. And this is where we really have to dig and reflect. So I'm going to give you just 10 more seconds to think about if there's anything you want to jot down now that maybe you want to reflect more on later. But where have you dismissed yourself in this challenge that you're looking at? So I'm going to go back to Tony, who really cared about environmental science, is now in a lab, but doesn't like his job. And part of what he has decided here is that he really knows that this is something he wants to pursue, but he keeps saying to himself, well, I have to stay in my first job for 3 years out of school. well, I have to do this. And he blocks himself from empathizing with the fact that what he actually is frustrated with his job is not what it is. It's doing the same thing every day that's driving him crazy. He needs to do something with more variety. And that requires reflection to get to. Now, let me just pause here and say, I know a few of us have said whether to go full-time or startup, and I do want to say, and we can talk more at the end, I do think there are some really dynamic challenges when you are facing the question of financially supporting a group of people and that sort of thing. So don't feel left out in this process. This applies to you too. Okay, so Tony may be at a different stage of life, but you can kind of continue to flesh this out for yourself, and we'll talk more about that at the end. So let's go to the next slide, because I think that's going to be useful to us. So as I just said, this is an example, empathizing with the end user. There's lots of different activities you can do to actually take a challenge and break it down into smaller or different questions. So for example, with Tony, it wasn't just, gosh, I'm stuck, I don't like this job. It was, well, what is the thing about your job that's the challenge? How can we better define that problem? And then how can we also empathize with you and what's going on and what you need from your work or life, right? So one thing I find that is really often missed, that people don't take the time to really reflect on, is how their life and work values, what they need from a place of employment. A lot of folks have not taken the time to really think through what these are, but more than that, recognizing that they change throughout life, that they shift and change dependent on our season of life. These are just a few examples. So take a moment now and actually type in to the chat if you feel comfortable. What are some things you value about, and we're just using work as an example right now, that you value in a workplace or a work experience. And something you can do, and what I would encourage you on that piece of paper, is to really take some time and think about what maybe your top 4 would be, and then even think about what your top 2 would be, okay? Now, part of what happens, I think, when we are facing a complex challenge is that challenge starts to pervade everything else that we think about, right? We start to think, well, gosh, if I don't have the right job, then I won't have good relationships. Or if I don't have this, then I won't have that. Again, part of what I'm getting at with this particular step is we need to take time to kind of look more at a micro level as to what we're trying to ask ourselves, what the challenge is that we're facing, and what it is we're really needing from the solution to this problem. Not what's the solution, but what is it that we're needing from the solution? That's a little bit different. That's asking a little bit of a deeper question, again, around values, around what the challenge actually is. Yeah, being open to innovative thinking. Absolutely. I think that's a good example of what a deeper challenge is with a place. A lot of folks, I've heard people say, gosh, I just don't like the culture here. Well, what does that mean? what part of the culture is the challenge? So again, creating a little more definition and spending a little more quiet with ourselves to do those first steps around empathy and really defining the problem. I can't tell you how many folks I've worked with over the years who are solving for the wrong problem. And we're very used to doing that in the business world, right? If we are, even just in the world of startups, we're solving people's problems, right? But if we're solving for the wrong problem, then obviously we're going to find ourselves in a bit of a sticky wicket. Okay, next slide. So hopefully you're, and we're coming toward the end here, next 5 minutes, just so you know, 5 or 10, and then we're going to do question and answer. So hopefully you're very clear on the fact that part of what we're driving toward is that so often the way we try and solve a challenge is straight line thinking. I don't like this job, I need to search for another job. I don't like where I live, I need to move. I don't like environmental science anymore, I must need to change my entire career. Okay, When in actuality, what we need to do is kind of look at a more micro level and understand that solving problems is actually about solving lots of little problems and identifying what the little challenges are in that framework. So we're empathizing, we're defining what the problem is, and then we get more to this ideation stage. And again, part of what I want to remind you is that for today's purposes, because we're doing this very quickly, we're talking about the various steps of design thinking and giving ideas. But clearly, when you're actually using design thinking in depth, you're actually going back and forth on that picture, the original picture with the hexagons. Okay, so it's not just one linear way of thinking. All right, let's go to the next slide. And so this is a really important slide. I want if nothing else sinks in for you during today, this I really want to kind of sink in. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of diverging and converging, it's just like it says, if you are diverging, you're going away from something, you're creating more options, okay? So in the concept right now, this is a very good image as we think about that middle picture of ideation in design thinking. It's the concept of coming up with lots and lots of ideas. And I'll tell you, this is what we are not trained to do as it connects to decision making. What we tend to do is we feel a rush to solve it right away, right? And so oftentimes if you have a problem, a lot of people will say, well, make a pros and cons list. That's great. I'm not against pros and cons lists. I'm not. But here's what happens with a pros and cons list. When you have a pros and cons list, you are sitting there going, okay, I understand the challenge. Here is 5 lines of what is positive. Here are five lines of what's negative. And it creates a bit of a linear way of thinking about it, right? It is important in different experiences. I definitely think it's a good tool, but there are more tools than just that. And I think that's the one we often think of for problems. And so what I want us to think about here is, what does it look like to create lots and lots of options for ourselves? Now, I'm going to give you an example of this. We're going to go back to our friend Tony. Tony, instead of going online to like look for jobs and saying, well, I guess I only have these 3 options I can do. These are the ones I'm qualified for. Tony instead does some mind mapping. He sits down, he thinks, okay, if I had my 3 greatest wishes, I could choose a few different paths. What would they be? If I was going to do something crazy that would never work, what would it be? If I was going to do something that I didn't have to worry about money, what would it be, right? Again, money is a big factor, especially you heard at the beginning of the presentation. I have 2 children. I am in the middle, and not that you only need money if you have children, but it definitely puts this weight, right, on you that you feel. Sometimes what happens is we short ourselves of the process of diverging to create lots of options in a problem because we think to ourselves, it won't work. It won't work, so we can't try. It won't work, can't try. We have to lean into the fact that we need lots and lots of ideas to find the best idea. And this is something that is critical to design thinking. It's also critical to the creative process. It's critical to the career process. There is so much research that shows that when we're in this scarcity mindset of feeling like it's not going to work, we can't actually create new neural pathways to find solutions. We just find the same ones over and over again. So what we need to do is to give ourselves the mental and emotional safety to diverge, to create out-of-the-box options. Again, how did someone come up with this phone? They thought about something crazy that wasn't even possible. So we've got to give ourselves some permission for that. Does that mean that you're going to go for the impossible option? No, it doesn't mean that. Does it mean that you're going to abandon all of your priorities? And no, absolutely not. There's still part of the process where you consider that. But there is good data to be had when you look at, wow, with this diverging exercise, what I came up with is I kept wanting to join the circus. What does that mean? Well, maybe it doesn't mean you want to join the circus. but maybe it means that you need something that's more dedicated to adding lightness and fun to people's lives. Maybe you're now looking for an organization that has some similar values to that. Maybe you never would have thought of that before. Maybe that's what happened to Tony. Okay, so here we are now. Tony's done this crazy exercise, and I can't get into all the exercises you could do today, but there's lots, right? And you start to converge your choices into what kind of priorities do we have? What makes the most sense at this point in life? Who do I know who might be connected to these spaces? And so maybe Tony says, I came to love environmental science because I liked working with kids in a summer camp when I was in high school. I actually really loved being outside with kids all day and like showing them leaves and telling them to look at the sky. And wow, I didn't realize that my care of environmental science was actually about that. Let's go to the next slide. Sorry, that was a quick switch for everyone, wasn't it? So this is our last kind of reflection moment before we get to the Q&A, and that is this concept of prototyping. So prototyping is where, and I'm sure you probably think of it, this probably is a very clear concept, but prototyping is how you try something out before you actually decide to go with it, okay? So prototyping is the area, again, that many of us feel a bit shy about doing. We don't want to feel like my 5-year-old with her crowns and kind of drawing and making something look, but you know what? Kids are not scared to prototype. They don't care. They just want to try something, right? We need to apply some of that same conceptualization to our own problems in our life. So what are some ideas of prototyping? Reaching out to people to have conversations who are in fields that you may be interested in, talking to people who have navigated this road before, creating some scenario planning for yourself. There are so many different ways to prototype. Taking 2 weeks or a week off of work, if you have the PTO, to actually try out what it's like to set your own schedule. Or there's lots of different ways to prototype. And again, we can't get into all the different conceptualizations today, but for time's sake, what I'd love is take a look at the challenge you have and ask yourself, is there a way to prototype this? So I'm going to give you an example of what Tony did for his prototype. He couldn't just leave his job, and he decided to start an after-school camp that he did in the summertime, or after school, we'll say, I don't know. He did it in a time that makes sense for his job schedule. And he found that he was really loving running the camp, but he actually just liked being with the kids. He didn't actually want to do all the administrative stuff for the camp. So he got a partner who was doing that part of it. And he found that he didn't actually dislike his job so much once he had the opportunity to have this other life-giving part of his life and work. And he had something in his life that grounded him into something a little deeper that he didn't realize he was missing. And suddenly the job that he was in wasn't so bad. And in fact, he started to be lighter at work, and his boss noticed, and he noticed there was a promotion, a pivot into something just a little different. And that really worked for him because he was able to engage with this camp, right? So, part of prototyping is allowing yourself to realize something you may not like about a particular field, and giving yourself that freedom, or something that you think might be a challenge that is that you can't anticipate. I wish I had more time to talk to you about prototyping, but what I'll say is that this is something where you let yourself think in kind of new ways about how you can actually do something tangible with this challenge or idea you have. So often many of us are just too nervous of feeling made fun of or feeling dumb. And I'm just going to sit there and pause for feeling dumb, right? There's something kind of deep and personal about that for folks. Like, I don't want to feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And the reality is, part of the design thinking process is assuming from the beginning that you have to say, I don't know what I'm doing. That's how you find better solutions for your problem. Okay. It's a different frame for how to solve problems. So let's go ahead now to, I think, the final slide here. And I think part of what I mentioned we would talk about locus of control, and what I want to say is that prototyping is really part of locus of control. So if you're unfamiliar with the term, you can Google it to learn more. But essentially, it's the idea that if you were to draw a circle, there's things in your control and there's things outside of your control, right? And people who have the ability to move through challenges are able to say, okay, what is in my control and how can I focus on leveraging that? Oftentimes when we're faced with problems, that locus of control feels smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and we aren't sure what to do, and we notice the scarcity of the situation. We don't notice the possibility of the situation. And so what you have to do is to find ways to continue to push out. Prototyping is a way to push out your locus of control and to say, I do actually have options in this scenario if I'm willing to blank, right? Now, again, this is something that's such a deeply personal topic. We've talked about it in very broad ways today. So I recognize some of what I have said may not apply to your specific situation, but hopefully it gives you a frame to start thinking of new ways to approach the problem. So here's a few ideas of things you can take away from today. That you want to give your creative side some breathing room. That's what ideation is, right? Don't shut it down before you even start it. Don't stop before you start. Oh, that's not possible because I didn't major in blank, right? Explore the false assumptions. The decisions you're making are not linear. There's lots of micro decisions along the way. You have to reflect and listen and give yourself space to quiet and think about where you can empathize with yourself more. And then finally, you need to talk to real people and prototype this challenge that you're facing. And talking to people can feel scary, right? You have to make sure that that person is somewhat trusted. Or if it's not someone who's trusted, someone who's new, but maybe someone who's in a space and has a perspective that you can't see from where you are. So those are a few takeaways. What I'd love to do now is to hear your thoughts, your questions you might have for you, and takeaways that you're taking with you today, things that you kind of stuck out as, oh yeah, that is really useful. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the chat here. Go ahead and share any questions or what you're taking with you today from this presentation. Any recommendation on how to be better at decision making? Say if I have to pick from two options and make a decision to pick one of them within 1 to 2 days. For me, when I pick one of the options, I feel bad later why I didn't choose the other option. Yeah, this is actually a fantastic, I have a great example for this. I do have a recommendation. There is a research project, his name is eluding me. I'm going to see if I can remember it before the end of the presentation, or maybe someone else might remember it. There's someone who did research about decision making, and actually what they did is they asked people to choose a picture of I think 4 different pieces of art, and they said choose any one you want. And they had 2 groups. One group, you had to choose your picture, and that was your picture forever. The other group, you had to you could pick your picture, but you could bring it back in 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks. You could bring it back, okay? And what they did is they tested the satisfaction people had with their picture. Well, what happened? The group that had the option to bring the picture back was significantly less satisfied with their picture. In fact, they didn't like their picture. They brought it back. They didn't like the other picture. There was no winning in that situation. The group that did not have the option to bring it back had really high satisfaction scores with their pictures. From a narrative perspective, many people said they loved their picture, that it spoke to them, it was really meaningful, they loved having it in their house. Now, what does that information tell us? Of course, you can't just look at one study. There, you'd have to look at a broad amount of research. But what I think this study demonstrates, and what the organizers of this research suggested, was that the human brain actually is wired to have a greater level of happiness when you know that once you choose your decision, you've chosen it. There's no going back. And let me put this in context, because I'm not saying, well, you got to make one decision for the rest of your life and you'll never get to change. No. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is there's a certain amount of human suffering that comes from the, like, is it this one or is it this one? Is it this one or is it this one? That's where the challenge is. Once you make the choice and deciding to be all in on that choice, that's what matters most. And so I do not have suggestions for you about how to be better at decision making in that regard. But what I can tell you is I would encourage you to look up this TED Talk, because it's very convincing to say, oh, wow, I guess part of what I have to have is a mindset that says, once I've chosen a direction, don't look back, right? I actually think this is really useful. I used to with my kids, even just yesterday, I was buying them St. Patty's, not trying to do a product plug, but a Shamrock Shake. And, one of now they have a shake, and then they also have an Oreo thing. So the kids had to choose. The second they chose it, they were like, gosh, I should have gotten the other one. Gosh. And I immediately said, do you want to give it back? Do you want me to get you the other one? Bad job, Mom. No, I need to say, you know what? That shake's going to taste great. You made a fantastic choice. You just enjoy that shake. That's the right shake for you, So applying some research to how we think. We actually have a lot more power over how we think than we realize. Hopefully that helps.
I love that example. I feel like that would be very similar to me if I was in that situation. Well, we have time for a couple more questions. And Ashley, I just want to thank you so much for all of the great advice and frameworks that you've shared. It looks like we have another question in the chat. When to make a decision with your gut versus when to go with an analysis?
Man, you are full of good questions here. Feel free to reach out more. This is good. So I will say, I know we're just down to the last 5 minutes. Here, what I would suggest, there is a lot of research on this topic, and I cannot speak to it fully in this very moment. What I can tell you is that there is a lot of research that supports that you do need to pay attention to what's going on in your gut when you come up with a decision, because there's valuable data in that. And again, I can't reference all of those right off the top of my head right now, but I think that's something to really pay attention to. At the same time, though, you want to find coherence between the two of those things. So that's really where the sweet spot is when you can navigate what's going on in your gut, but then you also want to say, does this analysis apply to my problem? So again, data analysis is very useful for certain problems that are somewhat straightforward. Dynamic challenges, it depends, because sometimes you can only predict in the future based off of past data. You don't have future data. So again, that's something that you have to, it depends on the situation and what you're actually facing with that. So that's what I'll say for now on that, but I think there's a lot of good articles that I could share later if you want about that topic. Retail trading suffers from that buyer-seller remorse. Yes, days later. I think that's very true, which is why it is kind of gut-wrenching to participate in that process, because it is like such a, you don't know. But there's something about that I think that's really thrilling for the human brain too. Anything else before we are done? Any other takeaways that you want to share from our time? Because I would really love to hear what stood out to you. Final chats of what you're taking away. I will also mention that I don't anticipate that you've solved your big sticky wicket completely in this 1 hour, but hopefully what you have done is taken away something that you can kind of ruminate on, stew on, that you'll find to be useful in the weeks and months to come. So if anyone wants to share takeaways, please do. If not, feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to connect more, and I'm really grateful. I just want to say thank you to my students at Loyola and the Quinlan School of Business for allowing me to be here, because that is something that I am really grateful for. So I see here we've got don't look back is a beneficial thing. Adapt your problem instead of the whole. Yeah, adapt the problem, absolutely. Yeah, instead of the 180, because sometimes we try and solve the whole problem and we need to solve many problems along the way. Absolutely. All
Well,
right.
Ashley, I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure hosting this event with you. Also, thank you everyone for attending our event. We would love if you want to share your feedback of this event on your Instagram stories or other social media platforms, just tag us at Chicago Startup Week. For the audience members, I want to encourage you to head to our next event, which is the Innovation and Entrepreneurship offerings at lots of different Chicago universities and schools. We have UChicago, Northwestern, UIUC, Illinois Tech, and CPS. So if you just click the session tab on the left, you can pick any of those schools that you want to attend. So thank you all so much for coming. This event is now over.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Alrighty, bye, Ashley.
Bye.